All right, please come to order. Please come and take your seats. Arlington Minutemen. Monotony Minutemen are going to regale us with some fine tunes this evening. You can sit down. Joining us for the invocation tonight, you might have to stand back up, is the Rabbi Howard L. Jaffe. The senior rabbi of Temple is Isaiah of Lexington. He's been that since the year 2000. Rabbi?
Friends, thank you so much for this invitation. It is an honor and a privilege to be with you this evening. Temple Isaiah is geographically, physically located in Lexington, but our congregation spans a wide area and includes many residents of Arlington, including a meaningful number who are part of this august body and present this evening. And I am especially then honored to be here to offer this invocation. Eternal One, Spirit of the universe who guides us all, we note that this is an auspicious day in particular on both the Jewish calendar and the Gregorian calendar by which the entire Western world lives. As the sun sets, Holocaust Memorial Day, Yom HaShoah, concludes, the day set aside to commemorate the horrors of the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children, and a total of 11 million human beings, including Slavs, Serbs, Romani, the disabled, and the mentally ill, were systematically and brutally murdered. And this year, Yom HaShoah, which falls according to the Jewish calendar, happened to coincide with the date of April 24th, Armenian Genocide Memorial Day. marking the first genocide of the 20th century in 1915, when 1.5 million Armenians were similarly brutally and systematically murdered. The Armenian experience inspired Hitler himself, who wrote of how just a few decades later, no one spoke of the Armenians any longer, and to the coining of the term genocide, ironically by a Jewish lawyer, to define systematic and premeditation exterminations within legal parameters, ironically in the year 1943, in the midst of Hitler's own efforts. Tonight's meeting is in fact a response to that darkness that is commemorated on this day. The commitment of those who come together to further the common weal of the residents of Arlington, and in turn all of us who are touched by its health and well-being as a community, is the most effective light that can be brought to our times. Where those who were in government and held power during the time of the Holocaust and of the Armenian genocide used their positions and their capacity to raise themselves up, solidify their own power, and eliminated those who they saw as standing in their way, the men and women of this town meeting gather to discuss, to determine, to discern, and to direct the capacity and the resources of this community to make it an even more caring, enlightened, dynamic place that enhances and enriches the lives of all of its residents. May the men and women who come together as Arlington Town Meeting continue to devote the very best of yourselves to bring the light that is the town of Arlington to all who make their home within its borders or whose businesses are fortunate enough to be located here. All of us who partake of the many gifts and offerings that are to be found in this wonderful community, that especially in times of challenge, such as those we are living through today, it can be said that this was a place of righteousness, of goodness, and of light. And if you are so inclined, I invite you to say, Amen.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Good evening, and welcome to the 2017 Annual Town Meeting, Arlington's 210th, our first meeting being held in 1807, and our 80th as a representative town meeting, the first in 1937. 150 years ago, in 1867, the name Arlington was chosen to honor those buried in Arlington National Cemetery. For guidance and procedure, we follow the town bylaws in Article 1 and the principles set out in town meeting time. If you'd like a copy of town meeting time, come see me at the break. Please remember to abide by our 48-hour rule. All substitute motions and substantial amendments to motions must be submitted electronically by email to me and in writing by placing a signed copy on each member's chair and by providing the original and 2 copies to me no later than the start of the session at which we're going to discuss the article. The only exception is tonight. We have a town member email list for distribution of material. Hopefully most of you have signed up for that. If you want to join, it's on the town meeting webpage. It's a little complicated to get to. If you can't figure it out, call me tomorrow and I'll walk you through it. Out of consideration of your fellow town meeting members and to allow full debate, please keep your remarks as concise and brief as possible so that all members have an opportunity to speak. Please heed by the sage advice of Mr. Doherty and/or his former town meeting moderator. About 3 minutes is enough. After 5 minutes, you put them to sleep, and after 7 minutes, they're going to vote against you, even if they agree with you. I truly believe that's true. You've each been issued your own coded clicker handset. The only keys we are going to use are 1 for yes, 2 for no, and 3 for abstain. Dave, got the clicker slide? Your handset should be turned on at the beginning of the meeting. Do not turn it off. We found that the most times the clicker doesn't work, it's user error. Someone has turned it off inadvertently, or they've pocket voted. They voted, and before the green light goes off, they put it away, and they've changed their vote. So wait till the green light goes off before you put it away. If your clicker's not working, immediately get my attention or Ms. Delano. She's our electronic voting administrator. She will help you get a new clicker. She'll get it fixed or whatever it is she has to do. She'll work with Mr. Lathwood. She's the only one who can talk to Mr. Lathwood. Mr. Lathwood runs the system for us. Town meeting does not provide for proxy voting. So if you leave early, turn your handset in. I don't know if there should be bins around on each corner, each door. Don't give your handset to someone else to vote for you. And if you see someone with 2 handsets, let me know. That's just not allowed by our rules or by state law. Don't lose the clickers. They're $75 each. I have to hunt you down and get the $75. In 2 years, we've never lost one. So what will happen is after the debate's concluded, I'll confirm with Mr. Lathwood that he's ready to go. He'll give us a thumbs up. The green light will go on. We have 20 seconds to vote. When the green light goes off, we get a tally. It'll show up on the screen what it is. And only yes and no votes are counted. Abstains do not get counted towards the majority or minority. We're going to take a test vote. Uh-oh. They gave me a question, but I lost it, but I can remember what it is. So every night we're going to take a test vote. It's also our quorum call. It's going to see if we have enough people in the audience, and it's going to test you and your clicker. So we're going to take a vote. Then they're going to scroll through all the screens, make sure what it says here confirms with what is on your screen. So let's give it a try. The question is, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is one of the 4 presidents on Mount Rushmore. True or false? Mr. Lathwood, are you ready? I'm ready. Okay, so go ahead and vote. Is Franklin D. Roosevelt one of the 4 on Mount Rushmore? 1 is yes, 2 is no. The yes, the no's got it. And he is not. It's Theodore Roosevelt who's on Mount Rushmore. So now look on your precinct, make sure they got your number right. If you have a question about voting, just as you would have done pre-clicker, rise, ask for a point of order. I'll explain what the vote is, or I'll explain what the clicker is working. We're going to use the consent agenda this year. You should have all gotten a consent agenda in your package, and it's been posted on the website. Just as we found this last year to be very useful, a lot of members liked it, and they actually told me we should have more things on the consent agenda. So just as we do with the budgets, I'm going to read through each of the consent agenda items, and if someone wants to discuss that item or wants it off the consent agenda, yell hold, and it'll be stricken from the agenda. All of these items are either no action votes or votes that I anticipate would have no debate or housekeeping, such as the money for sewers and water lines that we vote every year. At the end of the calling out all the numbers, I'll take one vote. Your vote will be reflected on each of the consent agendas as a yes or no vote. Finally, as a matter of scheduling, In courtesy, I've arranged for Dr. Boquillan, the Superintendent and Director of Minuteman, Article 44, to be heard on May 1st at 8 p.m. So May 1st, we're going to start. Whatever's in front of Article 44 will be tabled, and Dr. Boquillan will make his presentation to us, and we'll take our vote. And I've also arranged with Mr. Chapdelaine, Dr. Bodie, and Mr. Tosti to do budget Articles 33 and 34 on May 3rd. That's so all the town department heads don't have to come and hang around here for 4 or 5 nights. We can schedule them just the one budget night, and it's more efficient and courteous to all those folks. Now, we have been working with Andrew Kowalski, Adam Karowski, Lauren in Stephanie's office, Lauren Swetzer, and Joan Roman have been working really hard to get us electronically up on the website. Dave, can you bring it up? So, just as you have here, town government, town meeting, scroll down to warrant, click it, give it a second to come up. This just came live this afternoon at about 5. You now have the warrant, you have the articles, and we're going to go to 17, because 17 has a bunch of stuff. 17, there's the summary, all the reference materials, and it'll bring you to the Board of Selectmen's report. So all that paper we all have been getting is now all on the web, and it's right there. So if you want to ditch all the paper and bring your iPad or your tablet or your computer in, you can do that, just like Mr. Schlickman up front here. We should be able right now to accommodate about 80 people, which we're figuring would be good for a first year. So if everybody brings it in on Wednesday and tries to log on, it might be kind of balky. So this is all experimental. We just bring it up. Like I said, today is the first day they just finished this, and they worked really hard for us. So I want to give them a round of applause. Now, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for all Arlingtonians who passed away this past year. From Bernice Jones, a longtime town meeting member for Precinct 8, to Kenny Simmons, a long-term Finance Committee member, and to Ken Donnelly, our state senator, and all other Arlingtonians. Thank you. Now, all the town meeting members who were just elected for the first time this year, please stand up. There's about 30 of them, I think. At least, right? Yeah? First, thank you all. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, put your name in, will participate fully and will fairly evaluate all members before town meeting. And vote in the best interest of the town. I support free speech and will treat others with mutual respect. And will conduct myself in a civil manner that is becoming of an elected town meeting member. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully and impartially perform the duties incumbent upon me as a town meeting member in accordance with the bylaws, the Town Manager Act, and the general laws of the Commonwealth. So help me God. Thank you. Now, all the repeat town meeting members, you're going to have to swear me in. All the repeat town meeting members who are re-elected this year, please rise. We're going to go faster. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, John Leone, will participate fully and will fairly evaluate all meeting matters before town meeting. And vote in the best interests of the town. I support free speech and will treat others with mutual respect. And will conduct myself in a civil manner that is becoming of an elected town meeting member. I do solemnly swear that I'll faithfully and impartially perform the duties incumbent upon me.
Where's the next screen?
Yeah, there you go. As a town meeting member of the town of Arlington, in accordance with the bylaws, the Town Manager Act, the general laws of the Commonwealth, so help me God.
General laws of the Commonwealth, so help me God.
Thank you all. I recognize the Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Coro.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It is requested that the members of the Board of Selectmen and elected officials of the town, town manager, department heads of the town and staff, superintendent of schools and staff, committees, commissions, and boards of the town, Minuteman Regional Vocational Technical School District Committee, and superintendent members of the Electronic Voting Committee and staff, members of the General Court representing Arlington, and also any consultants who have been retained to work for the town relative to articles to be acted on by this meeting, and representatives of the news media be permitted to sit within the town meeting enclosure.
All in favor, please say yes. Yes. All opposed? It's a unanimous vote, and I so declare it. Constable's return. Madam Clerk, do you have reason to believe that this meeting was appropriately called by the Board of Selectmen and that the constable made a return of service on the warrant in accordance with the laws? She signifies yes. Mr. Coro.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It is moved that if all business of the meeting as set forth in the warrant for the annual town meeting is not disposed of at this session, when the meeting adjourns, it adjourn to Wednesday, April 26th, 2017 at 8 o'clock p.m.
All in favor? Opposed? It's a unanimous vote, and I so declare. Mr. Coro.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Fellow town meeting members, elected and appointed officials, professional staff, and members of the public and media. We gather together at a time of tension in our nation and our world, a time when some have expressed shaken faith in the ability of our democratic republic to address the problems of the 21st century. We come here empowered to dispel such doubts, performing our duty as caretakers and guardians of a glorious New England experiment in self-governance, one which has proven its resiliency time and again. We proudly uphold the tradition of town meeting, even as places like Framingham have cast it aside. No knock on Framingham. We serve in the shadows of predecessors long gone, continuing Arlington's enduring role as a leader in our state and beyond. As we take up the business of the 2017 annual town meeting, it is fitting that we should remember and draw inspiration from previous generations of Arlingtonians and from our town's rich heritage. Just yesterday, many of us participated in the Patriots' Day Parade to commemorate the role that monogamy played on the first day of the American Revolution. We remembered those brave colonists who answered the call for freedom at Foot of the Rocks in Monogamy Village, as well as the sacrifices of later generations who were inspired to serve by images of our native son, Samuel Wilson, better known to the world as Uncle Sam. This town meeting will have the opportunity, with our votes, to honor today's veterans through tax relief measures, appropriations for future patriotic observances, and for a CPA project to rehabilitate the final resting place of our Revolutionary War heroes. We will also have the opportunity to affirm our support for our local guardians of peace and security, the men and women of our police and fire departments. Among other actions, we will consider a resolution affirming our support of fair and impartial community policing and appropriations to financially sustain and equip our public safety officials in their important mission. I hope that over the coming weeks, we will look to the long-standing leadership of Arlingtonians in a variety of fields and pursuits. For example, in the realm of the arts, Arlington boasts sculptor and painter Cyrus Dallin, whose iconic depiction of Paul Revere on horseback is one of Boston's most familiar tourist attractions. Our town also nurtured composer Alan Hovhaness, whose musical works continue to be performed around the world, and many other artists, musicians, and authors have called Arlington home. Their muses will be in this hall when we consider budgets for public art initiatives. In the world of sports, Arlington High School produced two-time Olympian Johnny Kelly, who ran the Boston Marathon 63 times, winning it twice and 15 times finishing in the top 5. And U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame coach Ed Burns is surely smiling down from heaven at the recent AHS Super 8 title win. Our votes in support of parks, playgrounds, and other recreation facilities, and our endorsement of CDBG funding for athletic and camp scholarships help to create opportunities for tomorrow's superstars. Many of us hear echoes of Arlington's manufacturing past, of leaders like Pat Fitzmaurice, whenever the lathes of Old Schwam Mill start to spin, producing rare handmade frames and enduring as a living museum. Recent town meeting actions have helped to preserve this legacy of 19th century commerce. This year's town meeting will be asked to help spur 21st century economic development and to facilitate a more vibrant Arlington Center commercial district. Between yesterday's mills and today's restaurant and retail economy lie further examples of Arlington innovation. A local company helped us to develop our award-winning visual budget tool. And many years ago, the electronic spreadsheet was actually invented in an Arlington attic. Remember that. Those Arlington innovations underpin the presentation of budgets the town meeting will consider and help to make them accessible to the public. In fact, one very large spreadsheet forms the focal point for our long-range planning committee, helping us to capture assumptions and map a path for fiscal stability while funding vital town and school needs. It has provided the canvas upon which we have stretched a 3-year stability plan to 9 years, and it has and will help us to make the case to voters and taxpayers when we inevitably need their assistance to make it past the next funding cliff. Now, some Arlington stories are marked with humility and they're seldom told. There's the story, for example, of Ethelred Breeze Barry, an Arlington Heights children's book author and illustrator, who in 1910 established the Order of St. Anne, which spread throughout the world working with children and developmentally disabled women. Sisters of this order marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma and were visited right here in Arlington by Nobel Peace Prize winner Desmond Tutu. Indeed, acts of kindness abound in Arlington, where we're blessed with many volunteers and organizations who work to make the world just a little bit better, to reduce suffering and need, and to advance principles of fairness. Town meeting support of such work is expressed through measures to assist seniors and veterans in reducing their tax burdens, to financially support our human services activities and affordable housing programs, and to take a stand on issues of social justice. A love of learning is in our blood. We have the oldest continuously operating free children's library in the United States, and our schools have won many commendations. This town meeting honors that legacy with our votes to fund library services and equipment, and with the strong support that we have traditionally shown for our school facilities and operations. And this year in particular, we must thank the voters and taxpayers of our town for their generosity in supporting school building projects to address our explosive enrollment growth and the deteriorated condition of our high school and regional vocational education facilities. Now, I've mentioned but a few ways in which our history informs our actions today. This town meeting has the opportunity to write new pages in the history books as we debate our competing visions for Arlington's future development, upgrades and maintenance of roads, sidewalks, water, sewer, and other vital infrastructure, regulatory measures to protect our environment for coming generations, and other quality of life issues. We've heard it said that budgets reflect our values. Indeed, the entirety of our actions and the way we conduct ourselves over the coming weeks will reflect on Arlington and the way we are seen by our neighbors and others. Arlington is a town that produces leaders. Indeed, 2 of our neighbors who seek to fill the very big shoes left behind by Senator Ken Donnelly got their legislative starts sitting right where you are this evening. Our town manager deputy town manager, finance committee chair and vice chair, and one of our school committee members have all held top leadership roles in their respective professional associations and are looked to by people in other communities to share the story of the Arlington experience. It is much the same with our professional staff, perhaps nowhere better exemplified than with our police chief, whose advice and counsel has been sought by the Attorney General of the United States, the United States Senate, and governors as far away as Arizona. We have much to be proud of, just as we have many challenges ahead. On behalf of the Board of Selectmen, I say enthusiastically that we look forward to writing the next pages of Arlington's history together with you. Here's to a successful 2017 annual town meeting. God bless you, and God bless the town of Arlington. Thank you.
Are there any announcements or resolutions? Where'd he go? Yes, there you go. I knew there was one.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve DeCourcy, Precinct 2. Just want to announce once again this year the Arlington High School girls tennis team is providing baked goods and beverages during the break. This afternoon they defeated Woburn, and with that win, they now have 6 wins and 1 loss, their best record since entering the Middlesex League 6 years ago. They're only 4 wins away from making the tournament. So if you have time tonight, support the team and wish them well the rest of the year.
That brings us to Article 3, Reports of Committees. I call for all reports that are ready to be received. Mr. Coro? Joe.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the report of the Board of Selectmen be received.
Mr. Coro, were you going to introduce the Board of Selectmen and the department heads, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to introduce to you my colleagues on the Board of Selectmen and a lot of the folks who really make this town run on a day-to-day basis. First of all, my colleagues, I have here the Vice Chair of the Board of Selectmen, Stephen Byrne. Next to him is Dan Dunn, Diane Mahan, and the Dean of the Board of Selectmen, Kevin Greeley. Now I'd like to introduce to you our excellent professional staff. Behind me here, our town manager, Adam Chapdelaine. A new father 2 times over now. Our deputy town manager, Sandy Pooler. Assistant town manager, Jim Feeney. Director of Inspectional Services, Michael Byrne. Director of Information Technology on the keyboard, David Good. Town Council, Doug Heim. Fire Chief, Robert Jefferson. Known to most as the Mayor of Arlington, our Board Administrator, Marie Kropelka. Our Director of Human Resources, Karen Malloy. Our Workers' Compensation Agent, Ed Marlenga. Our new Director of Recreation, John Marshall. The Deputy Town Treasurer, Michael Morse. Our Library Director, Andrew Nicolai. Director of Public Works, Michael Rademacher. Director of Planning, Jenny Raitt. Chief of Police, Fred Ryan. Director of Assessments, Paul Tierney. And last but not least, our excellent comptroller, Rich Viscay.
I'd like to introduce two more officials of the town. Our newly elected, re-elected treasurer, town clerk, Stephanie Lucarelli. And our newly elected for the first time treasurer, Dean Carmen. What's that? Two more? Oh, there's two more.
Slip the list. How could I forget this? Our Director of Health and Human Services, Christine Bongiorno. And our Director of Facilities, Ruthie Bennett. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Coro. Any other reports? Right, Al's going to go first.
I move that the report of the Finance Committee be received. Mr. Moderator, if I could make a few
Oh, okay.
very brief. First of all, I'd like to introduce the members of the Finance Committee. If you could hold any applause until the end, I'd appreciate it, so everybody gets the same applause. Precinct 1, representing Precinct 1 is John Deist. Sure he's there? Okay. Precinct 2, Steve DeCourcy. Precinct 3, that's me. Precinct 4, Jean Ann Russell. Precinct 5, Mary Margaret Franklemont. There. Precinct 6, Carolyn White. Precinct 7, Jonathan Wallach. And the back. Precinct 8 at the head table, Charlie Foskett. Precinct 9, Brian Beck. Precinct 10, Peter Howard. Precinct 11, Tom Cacavera, way in the back. Precinct 12, Daryl Harmer. Precinct 13, Paul Baer. Precinct 14, Alan Jones at the head table. Precinct 15, also at the head table, Richard Fanning. Precinct 16, William Keller. Precinct 17, Grant Gibeon. Precinct 18, Rohit Javadi. Precinct 19, Christine Deschler, over here. Precinct 20, now we have a vacancy. Precinct 21, Dave McKenna. And I'd like to introduce you our new Executive Secretary, Elizabeth Diggins, over at the head table. Now, briefly, in the Finance Committee report, you'll see the report of the chair. I don't think I have to, go through it again. If anybody has any questions, please come and see me. The one thing that I would like to point out to all of you is the next to the, actually it's the last page in the Finance Committee report is our 5-year long-term plan. And for the new people who are new here, the new town meeting members, the long-range financial projection, which is worked on extensively by the town manager's office and the long-range planning committee with many meetings, this is the heart and soul of the town of Arlington's financial plan going forward. This is how we balance the budget. This is how we bring everybody together, selectmen, finance committee, capital budget committee, school committee, and other major officers, financial officers in the town, including the treasurer, the assessor, and the controller. So this is where we work things out. This is where we try to find compromises. This allows us over the last many years to move forward without a debt exclusions. I hope that all of you will review this, and I will be happy when we get to the Finance Committee articles to sort of go through it quickly and answer any questions. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to come up and see me or any of the other 20 members of the Finance Committee. They'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tosti.
Thank you, Andrew Brunell. Excuse me, Andrew Brunell, Chair of the Arlington Redevelopment Board. I move that the report of the ARB be accepted.
Thank you, Mr. Bennell. Mr. Foskett, get you next.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Charlie Foskett, Precinct 8 and Chairman of the Capital Planning Committee. I ask that the report of the Capital Planning Committee, which is purple and which is on your seats, be received.
Thank you, Mr. Foskett. Ms. Rowe?
Clarissa Rowe, Precinct 4, Chair of the Community Preservation Committee, and I ask to have the Community Preservation Committee's report received.
Thank you, Ms. Rowe. Any other reports of committees? Okay, seeing none. There were a lot of committees that didn't report in the last year or so. If you look in your past years' warrants, there's lists of committees. We've been disbanding committees that don't meet anymore or are obsolete. If you are a part of a committee that used to meet and is obsolete, please let us know so we can strike you from the rolls. If we don't hear from any committees this year, we may just arbitrarily strike you. Okay, Mr. Tosti.
I move that the recommended votes contained in the respective reports of the Finance Committee, Board of Selectmen, and Redevelopment Board and other committees be before the meeting without further motion.
Okay, all in favor of receiving the committee's reports that have been put before us, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? All of those reports are now before us.
I move that Article 3 be laid upon the table.
All in favor of laying Article 3 upon the table, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? Okay. Article 3 is on the table. After speaking with Mr. Tosti and the assistant moderator, I've determined that we're going to do the consent agenda on Wednesday out of fairness to all of you who just received it today and the fact that we just received the Finance Committee reports this evening. You may want to look those over, and then we'll go right into the other articles, and on Wednesday we'll take the consent agenda up. So Article 3 is on the table. That brings us to Article 4. Appointment of measure of wooden bark. Do I have any nominations from the floor? If not, I will nominate myself, Ms. Elsie Fiore. Second. All in favor of Ms. Fiore being the measure of wooden bark, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? Ms. Fiore has that honorary position one more time. She actually does go out and measure people's bark and wood piles, and if they think they were shorted, she is the one you will call if you didn't get a cord of wood or a cubic yard of mulch. She's the lady you call. That closes Article 4. Brings us to Article 5, election of Assistant Town Moderator. Are there any nominations from the floor? Mr. Helmuth. Yep.
Eric Helmuth, Precinct 12. I nominate James O'Connor.
We have one nomination on the floor for James O'Connor. Do we have any other nominations? Seeing none. All in favor of Mr. O'Connor for the assistant moderator, please say yes. Yes. All opposed? It is a unanimous vote, and I so declare it. Mr. O'Connor, congratulations. That closes Article 4 and brings us to Article 6, zoning bylaw amendments, mixed use in business and industrial zones. Mr. Bennell.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, town meeting. Last year in its wisdom, town meeting approved mixed-use development in the town of Arlington, which is an excellent decision on your behalf. Thank you. This article seeks to further refine what was approved last year by altering the minimum lot area per dwelling unit square foot requirement. What that means is you are opening up the inside of buildings to further development. I should note that this has nothing to do with the footprint, the window pane, the box, the envelope of the building on the outside. As the Department of Planning and Community Development has reviewed certain projects that have come before it over the last year, received feedback from certain developers and other interested parties that the requirements make it difficult to achieve the density in commercial corridors as recommended in the master plan. Currently, the recommended requirement is too high, and it results in fewer larger units rather than a variety of unit sizes as recommended by the master plan, as recommended by the housing production plan, which was adopted last year by the ARB, the Board of Selectmen, and the State Department of Housing and Community Development. What it will allow for is more affordable and mid-range housing units to be opened up and developed in town, something that is extremely necessary, as I'm sure we can all agree and attest to. Again, it's an important goal of the master plan, and once again, just to reiterate, this is only something that will take place in mixed-use structures and mixed-use districts, Broadway and Mass Ave. This isn't going to impact small neighborhoods, single-family homes. It's an idea to further expand commercial corridors, as the chair of our Board of Selectmen alluded to. It's the kind of development we were looking for when we allowed mixed use last year. What it does, again, is it opens up the possibilities for housing in town, so that we're looking at a different variety, different diversity of housing stock. Again, so I urge you to support this. I think it's a very important thing, and it further refines the mixed-use amendment that came in last year. Thank you.
Anyone wish to speak to the article? Seeing none, looks like we're ready for our first vote. We have before us a recommended vote of the ARB. Mr. Lathwood, when you're ready. For the Newtown meeting members, we don't read out what the warrant article is, nor do we read out what the recommended vote is. What we just did was received all these reports, and that makes the votes automatically before us that are contained in those reports. So we're now voting on the recommended vote of the ARB in their report, and I'm not going to read it out. That would just delay everything. All right, so Mr. Lathwood's ready, and we have 20 seconds to vote, 1 for yes, 2 for no. Oh, yeah. It's a positive vote, 207 to 7. We don't have to scroll through the names every time, though. We're just going to go with the tallies. So Article 6, a positive vote, 207 to 7. That's a positive vote, and I so declare it. That closes Article 6 and brings us to Article 7. Mr. Bennell.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Andrew Burnell, Chair of the Arlington Redevelopment Board. Article 7, again, is a further refinement of the mixed-use zoning bylaw that came in last year and was approved by town meeting. What this does, by removing the maximum square foot area requirement, adds to the possibility for artisanal uses in the town of Arlington. It allows for a broader range of uses under the definition of artisanal use. As we've gone through the process over the last year, we've discovered that certain kinds of business that fall into this category simply can't locate and can't start in Arlington. For example, things like breweries, things like commercial kitchens, things like community workshops and shared workspaces simply don't have the space they need now under these size requirements. What this does is it encourages businesses to locate in Arlington, encourages businesses to grow in Arlington, and it encourages these kinds of businesses to stay in Arlington as they grow within the town. It's an important part of the arts and cultural planning process as well. What we found is there's a lot of creative work happening at home. People are looking for these kinds of larger spaces to grow into and expand from. If we remove the current requirement, we can encourage that to happen right here in Arlington and stay here in Arlington. Another important goal of this is that it helps to encourage growth and development in Arlington's minimal industrial areas, which again is an important goal of the master plan. People have expressed a desire to keep those areas as they are and really support those to transition into 21st century industries and beyond. So I encourage you to support this. Thank you very much.
Anyone wish to speak to the article? Seeing none, we're ready for our vote. Yep. Okay, Mr. Lathwood's ready. And vote 1, yes, you want to do this, or 2, you do not. 1 for yes, 2 for no. It's an affirmative vote, 216 in the positive, 2 in the negative. It's a vote, and I so declare it. 116 to 2. And that closes Article 7 and brings us to Article 8.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Andrew Bunnell, Chair of the Arlington New Development Board. Mr. Moderator, if I may, I would request that the speaker's time be extended to 15 minutes for this article. It's quite an expansive issue with a number of moving parts.
The Redevelopment Board is requesting 15 minutes to present. It's up to the meeting. All in favor of giving them the time, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? No. You have the 15 minutes, sir.
Thank you all. I'm only going to speak briefly about what brings us here to Article 8 this evening. You all probably remember, if you were part of town meeting last year, the residential zoning bylaw warrant articles that came before you, which ultimately resulted in the establishment of the residential study group. This article is the first outcome of what we hope to be many from the residential study group. We began meeting back in late August, early September. Since then, we've had more than 30 meetings, something like 900 hours of meetings trying to get to the bylaws, bylaw proposals, warrant articles that come in front of you over the course of this town meeting. There's an extreme diversity of voices, and I mean that in the most positive way. People who were on either side of the issue just have come together in the spirit of compromise over the last several months to put forth what we think are some very strong articles to support and encourage responsible residential development in the town of Arlington. Where we began was we looked at some of the issues that came forth last year, decided to begin with what we thought there was the most consensus on, which happened to be one of the last articles presented to town meeting. That came up with driveways, what to do about driveways, what to do about major slopes, what to do about what really is a public safety issue, but also impacts streetscapes and the aesthetics of neighborhoods. And over the first few meetings, it became clear that this was really the spot to begin. This was the point where all of these varying factions and different voices could come together and put something forth to town meeting that every single member of this committee really truly believed in. I'll go to the next slide. What we've done is taken a look at making these changes, taking into consideration the housing production plan, taking into consideration the master plan, taking into consideration some of the voices we've heard since the master plan was put in play. I'll go to the next slide, please. We looked at our current priorities and we looked at our future priorities. And again, it's important to note this is an ongoing process. This is not a one and done group that came forth to present certain articles this year. We'll keep the consensus going. We'll keep the good feelings going. And again, we really believe that what's put in front of town meeting has been strong. It's been vetted. The research has been done. We've looked at a number of different towns, similar to Arlington, some not so similar to Arlington. We've taken walking tours around town. We've talked with residents. We've talked with decision makers. We've really looked at every possible option here as to what people like and what people want to see. Go to the next slide. This is a map of demolitions and large addition permits over the last several years. And one of the things that we realized as a group was that development in Arlington really isn't that common. It's a pretty small percentage of houses in Arlington that are being torn down and rebuilt. The issue is that it's widely felt because it's over such a broad swath of the town. And so we've taken that into consideration as well. Again, the first issue that we took a look at was the driveway issue of last year. How do we approach this in a way that can really impact town in a positive way, bring some consensus to the group, and keep things going? Two of the most instrumental members of this group were Elizabeth Pyle, who's a town meeting member, and Steve McKenna, who's a resident of the town and a longtime business person in town. So I am going to cede the rest of my time to Elizabeth and to Steve to present the rest of this article to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Pyle. I'm an attorney, a member of the Residential Study Group, and a town meeting member from Precinct 10. I'm going to discuss Article 8 with you this evening, along with Steve McKenna, who is also on the Residential Study Group. Article 8 is intended to eliminate dangerously steep, downward sloping driveways and to encourage new houses to have parking at the surface level. First, I'd like to discuss driveway slope with you. This article would limit downward sloping driveways to no more than 15%. This is what is recommended by all leading authorities and experts to protect public safety. This is a duplex on Mott Street with a steep downward sloping driveway. This driveway you see in the slide has a 26% slope. Currently, driveway slope in Arlington is not regulated, and driveways are being built with as much as a 28% slope, which is too steep and not safe. This article is important because steep downward sloping driveways are a safety hazard. First, the driver cannot see pedestrians on the sidewalk when backing out of the driveway because the rear windshield is pointed too much toward the sky. It is especially difficult to see children on the sidewalk. These types of steep driveways are also difficult to use in icy conditions because it's too hard to shovel the ice and snow out of the pit. As a result, cars park at the top of the driveway in winter, blocking the sidewalk and forcing pedestrians to walk into the street. All leading authorities recommend capping residential driveway slope at 15% or less for safety reasons. These include the Town of Arlington Engineering Division, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, the National Highway Institute, and the Institute of Transportation Engineers. You should also note that many other municipalities in Massachusetts limit driveway slope, including Belmont, Lexington, and Cambridge. This article does not apply to existing driveways which are grandfathered. It's for new construction only. A secondary benefit of limiting steep driveways is that it will also discourage the garage under the house design. The garage under the house design is problematic because the entire front yard is taken up by a pit in front of the house. It makes the front yard unusable as recreational space. This style of house also creates too much massing because the double garage bays look like a full story of the home, and then there are an additional 2.5 stories on top of the garages. The overall effect is that these houses look like 3.5-story homes instead of 2.5-story homes, and they're out of scale with the surrounding neighborhoods. Here are examples of 2-family houses where the garages are at grade level. Article 8 will encourage this style of home. Here, parking is at grade, so there is no public safety hazard associated with steep driveways. The front yard is usable recreation space, and these houses are in scale with surrounding homes. They look like 2.5-story homes. This slide shows a driveway with a 28% slope from the side, so you can see how steep it is. A driveway with a 15% slope is next to it. Article 8 would prevent these steep driveways, which are public safety hazards. The second thing that Article 8 does is that it reduces the number of required off-street parking spaces behind the front setback from 2 spaces per unit to 1 space per unit. This applies only to 1, 2, and 3-family homes. Under the current bylaw, you must have 2 parking spaces behind the front setback. This slide shows setbacks on a typical lot. The front setback is the distance the house must be pushed back from the front property line. This slide shows all the setbacks in green. The front setback is 20 feet, the rear is 20 feet, the side setbacks are 10 feet. The gray area is where the house can go. Currently, the bylaw forces people to have 2 parking spaces per unit behind the front setback. Oops. Oh, no. That's the red line at the bottom there. It forces 2 spaces behind the front setback, whether they need them or not. This photograph on the left shows what is required now. 2 garage spaces behind the front setback for a single-family home. This is a lot of garage for a single-family home. The picture on the right shows what is proposed. It has 1 garage space for a single-family home. This is what Article 8 will encourage. It allows the home to have a greater ratio of living space to garage space, more living space and less garage space. This will help to control the size of new houses. Note that Article 8 does not require fewer parking spaces. It gives developers and homeowners a choice. Article 8 allows the choice and flexibility to have 1 parking space per unit behind the front setback. Note that this article does not require any changes to existing houses. If people decide they want to have fewer parking spaces, this article gives them that flexibility. It allows homeowners to make a sustainable choice to have fewer cars and parking spaces. It doesn't require it, but it gives people that choice. Another benefit of reducing the required number of parking spaces is that it will also discourage the garage under the house design. This slide shows a duplex with a steep downward sloping driveway and 4 parking spaces below grade at the basement level. The current parking requirement has led to the proliferation of this house design because it is the only way to fit 4 parking spaces behind the front setback on a small lot and still have enough living space for a duplex. This slide shows what we are proposing for a duplex. Parking at grade level with enough room on the ground floor for living space, particularly with the changes we are proposing in Special Town Meeting Article 1. Now, some people have asked, will this create a demand for more overnight parking street waivers from the Board of Selectmen? We have looked at this issue, and the answer is no. Under this article, you can still have 1 garage space behind the front setback, and you can still park a second car in the driveway. People also park in the driveway now because the garage under the house design, with that design, people end up storing their belongings in the garage because there is no separate basement space. Article 8 will encourage surface parking, a full basement for storage, 1 car in the garage, and a second in the driveway. Now, there's a proposal to amend Article 8 that would eliminate the reduction in parking, supposedly because of a concern that there would not be enough parking spaces for all of the cars in town, or because cars parked in the driveway would stick out into the sidewalk. Again, reducing the parking space per unit is a choice people can make if they want to have fewer cars and make that sustainable decision. It doesn't mean that people are required to have only one garage space. It gives the option of one space if people decide that they want it. The proponent of the amendment is also concerned that some driveways would be too short to park a car in without overhanging onto the sidewalk. If the driveway is too short to hold a car, it's not a legal parking space, and inspectional services can tell people not to park there. This is not a reason to require everyone to have 2 parking spaces behind the front setback, even if they don't need them. The proponent of the amendment has also claimed that cars parking side by side in a driveway are not safe. There is no support for that assertion, and common sense tells us that parking side by side next to another car is safe. It's what we do every time we pull into a parking lot at Stop and Shop or CVS or Whole Foods.
You have 2 minutes left, Ms. Pyle.
I'm going to cede the rest of my time to Mr. McKenna.
I'll leave you this once you take care of the clicker. Folks, on the next slide, although these slides are depicting a specific lot on Mott Street, because there was a house that was built there with the photographs, we actually, as a group, looked at all of the lots and understanding that there's hundreds of different lots throughout the town of Arlington, and we want to make sure we've gotten this right. As presented, what we are proposing is that any driveway leading to off-street parking on a lot cannot exceed a 15% slope, a downward slope, as measured from the farthest point from the front property line, except by special permit. If, using the slide, if you would take a look at it, the house that was built on Mott Street, if we use the 15% slope that we're describing and proposing, the house that was built could not be built on the same lot because it would exceed the setback requirements on 2 factors. It would go beyond the rear yard setback, and it would also go into what's called the open space. The house would be pushed back 7 feet in order to generate the 15% slope. So this is a safer environment. It also would result in the house becoming 700 square feet smaller, which we talked about massing. This is something that we think developers would realize they would not want to build, so therefore we think they would like the proposals that we're trying to make. On the next slide, please. So the next slide, this depicts another alternative for not building on a sloped driveway, which is when parking is placed on the side yard and both cars are parked behind the front yard setback. Now, this may not be typical what you see for a 2-family, but it could happen for a single-family home, and we are talking about single-family and 2-family dwellings. In this event, we were concerned about the neighbors abutting where the cars would be parked, so we are proposing that side yards used for parking shall have a vegetated buffer when abutting a lot used for residential purposes to minimize the visual impacts. And we'll show you the next slide, which has some photographs. There on the left side, you can see houses that are existing that do not have a buffer area. When you have a driveway abutting a driveway, it looks like a parking lot. As opposed to the right-hand side, we have a buffer area. We feel that that's not only going to have a positive visual impact, it also will allow a person who's got that side parking lot, the side parking space, that they're not going to be opening up their door and walking onto their neighbor's yard. This buffer area is going to be protection for the abutter. So that's what we're proposing. In conclusion, I do want to say that the residential study group has spent months, as they've talked about, reviewing the zoning bylaws and painstakingly understanding the concerns of all sides regarding new construction. It truly is a delicate situation, and we believe we have presented a balanced approach with a lot of compromises on all sides. Therefore, it is the residential study group's opinion that Article 8, in conjunction with all the proposals that you will hear that will be presented to you by us, the residential study group, and that are the beginning steps of a new construction, for safer, better, more appealing construction to help the environment throughout the town of Arlington. Please understand that the zoning is a very complicated puzzle, and we are committed to finding the right pieces that fit properly to ensure we reach the concerns and the goals for everyone. That is why we ask you to approve all of our proposals in the entirety of Article 8. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKenna. Thank you, Ms. Pyle. Mr. Sharp.
Ted Sharp, Precinct 7. I propose an amendment to Article 8. It's on your seats. It was distributed electronically. It's succinct. I might as well just read it to you. Voted that the you've actually heard it described. Voted that the recommended vote of the Arlington Redevelopment Board under Article 8 be and hereby is amended by deleting all text beginning with the words and amending Article 8, Section 801 off-street parking requirements, and continuing through the end of the vote, thereby leaving Article 8, Section 801 of the Arlington zoning bylaw unchanged.
Do I have a second? Mr. Sharp's
I've proposed this amendment as a courtesy to a resident of my precinct, Chris Loretti, who will address its merits.
Mr. Loretti has a right to speak as a town resident.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, Mr. Sharp, for doing that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm was a 10-year
Name and
member.
address?
Chris Loretti, 56 Adams Street. I was a town meeting member for 10 years and a member of the redevelopment board for 5 years. I want to make clear at the outset that I support the ARB's motion to the extent that it regulates driveway slope and imposes a buffer. I do not support the proposal to reduce the off-street parking requirement currently in the bylaw, and that's why I have asked Mr. Sharp to submit this amendment. I'd like you to consider two numbers. 38,000 motor vehicles live in the town of Arlington. There are approximately 19,000 housing units. If you do the math, that's 2 motor vehicles per unit. Now, I fully recognize that some of those motor vehicles are commercial and may not be parked in residential areas. However, other studies done and census data indicates that the average number of cars per owned dwelling unit, more like 1.7. And that includes dwelling units that are in these high-rise apartment buildings, condominiums and those types of buildings, which typically have much less demand for parking. What the proponents of this article is saying, well, that's okay, you can just park on the driveway in front of your house. Well, there's a long-standing tradition in Arlington that we don't have parking in the front yard. And I appreciate Mr. Bonnell's comments about preserving the streetscape. We don't have that for 2 reasons. One is aesthetics. You don't want it to look like you're driving down through a parking lot when you drive down the street. And also safety. Now, the proponents have talked about a 20-foot setback, and that applies nominally in the R2 zoning district. However, there's an exception to the bylaw that applies more than that 20-foot setback requirement. And that setback, the exception says if the block is more than half developed, you can reduce the setback to the average of the other houses on the street. And in the older sections of the town, particularly in East Arlington, most of the setbacks aren't 20 feet. And that's what results in the cars backing right up to the sidewalk if you have to park a second car there and only have one space in front of or behind the setback. So I submit that when you have 2 cars parked next to each other, it's very unsafe pulling into the sidewalk, and that's something that should be avoided. I'm focusing my comments on 2-family houses because almost all of these developments are for 2-family houses. There's a scattering of them for 1 family. But if you look at the data for the house permits for new houses in 2016, none of the houses, single-family houses, had these types of driveways that were steeply sloped downward, and only 2 of the 6 2-family houses had them. So I'd like to just show you a few pictures to illustrate some points. This is a situation that I'm talking about not being able to see cars parked out, backing out of the driveway. So be careful of that gray Corolla that's backing out. Oh, you didn't see it because it's hidden by the SUV. If you're walking down the sidewalk, you want to be able to see those cars coming. Or if you're driving down the street, you want to be able to see them coming. This is what happens when you park right up to the sidewalk. Now, this is an existing house, and you typically see this on a house on a corner lot. But I want to show you this house. This is not a brand new house, but it's one that's been heavily renovated, and they maxed out the amount of floor space they could add without going before the ZBA. And again, the same thing has happened. Now, the statement was made, oh, you can just put more parking spaces in front. But you can't do that in this case, and you can't do it because you don't have the open space to do it. And so it's not strictly an option for putting more spaces on the lot. You have other constraints that have to be met. This is what happens. This is another house in East Arlington. Now, this is not legal either, but imagine the setback on that house is, and imagine if that was a garage where the house is. You still would have the situation where you'd have that one space per unit that meets the new requirement in the house, but you don't have room for that second car without blocking the sidewalk. Now you might say, oh, that would never happen with a new house. Well, take a look at this house. This is a very nice, large two-family house that's being constructed by one of the developers on the Residential Study Committee. And the way it's constructed now is there is a double-width garage, entirely in compliance with the zoning bylaw. But let's imagine that that's only a one-car garage, and the back of that garage is used for storage or it's used for living space. This developer took advantage of that exception to the bylaw that many developers do, and that space is only 14 feet. You can't fit another car there if it's a car of any size without infringing on the sidewalk. I submit that this change will definitely lead to more requests to the selectmen for exceptions to the overnight parking ban. They just did one of these a couple months ago for an old house where the garage was too close to the sidewalk to allow a second car to park there. So I appreciate the work of the residential study group, and I appreciate that they did a survey. I wish they had included parking in that survey, but unfortunately they didn't. So I ask you to support this amendment, and then and only then support the ARB's recommended vote under this article. And I thank you for your attention. I'll stand by in case anyone has any questions through the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lardy. Mr. Jameson? Mr. Wagner?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Carl Wagner, Precinct 11. I'm glad that Mr. Sharp has put forward his amendment on the article. I think the work that this body tried to do last year was very much in the right direction. Maybe we had some class assumptions of why we didn't do things. In the time, even since that point, houses are going up that are essentially threatening the way that we live. Whether you live in a rich house or in an apartment, a condo, whatever, I think I want to applaud the work of the redevelopment board in looking at making the houses and the town stay the way that we love it, the way it was when we were kids if we grew up here. And so the first part of what's proposed by the redevelopment board really makes sense. The carrot, I guess it is, to say, hey, it's okay to only have one car in a unit that, like mine, has 3 now, is I think ridiculous. And I hope we'll move forward with the amendment as it has been laid out and go forward to keep the town the way we love it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. McCabe?
Mark McCabe, Precinct 2. I stand to terminate debate on Article 8 and all matters before it.
We have a motion to terminate debate on Article 8 and all matters before it. It's been seconded. As soon as you're ready, we'll get to 2/3 vote. All in favor of terminating debate, press 1 for yes, 2 for no when we get the green light. Okay, 1 to terminate debate, 2 to continue debate. Yeah. It's not a 2/3 vote. The motion fails. It's not a 2/3 vote. The next person on the list is Mr. Schlickman.
Paul Schlickman, Precinct 9. I note that the Metropolitan Area Planning Council came into Arlington and did a much publicized study that showed that our multifamily housing actually contains too much parking required by bylaw, so that we have either empty spaces or we're encouraging too much of utilization of green space and space for parking. I think that the current proposal before us by the redevelopment board gives people who are developing their property a sensible option. I don't think we should be requiring too much parking by right. I urge you to vote down the amendment and to support the redevelopment board's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schlickman. Ms. Maman, did I say it right?
Hi, Zarina Amendment, Precinct 21. I am in favor of the amendment. I think this is a wise argument that Chris Loretti pointed out, and I think we should look at this. Having the developers cut corners to make the money is not sensible for this town. We should have a more practical approach to how cars are parked, and so I have a huge problem with the article as is. But my question right now is, why was this article put in with both the grade and the parking situation? Could they have not been separated so we could have an easier time voting? Because I am in favor of reducing the grade, but now I'm left in a dilemma.
Mr. Bennell, do you want to address that?
I'll defer to Elizabeth Pyle to answer that question.
When we looked at the issue of the steep garage under houses, we saw that what was driving that house design was the requirement to have so many parking spaces. And that design will continue unless this requirement is reduced. And this is an important part of the article to make it all work together, because right now, if you think about it, you can't have 4 parking spaces on a lot and pretty much do anything other than a garage under space. There's not enough room to have living space unless you go down and put your living space on top of it. So the garage under design and all of its problems will persist unless this option is put forward. And that way you can have...
Okay. So what you're saying is this is a two-family...
Nope, you asked me the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. So this is a problem for two-family housing only, and so you're thinking the 15% is going to solve the problem for a single-family residence as well as a 3-family? Because I see the numbers presented by Mr. Loretti showing a breakdown, and you did not present any of these numbers.
No,
Well, you guys are going to have an internal debate.
I'd rather
Is there an actual question there?
Yes, so I'm trying to understand the logic for this 15% with the number of parking spaces. Is this for single-family housing, two-family housing, or 3-family housing? Or was this same argument used for all 3 of them? I don't understand it still.
Does the same grade apply to all residential buildings across the board?
It applies to 1, 2, and 3-family homes.
Okay.
And is that violation in all 3 types of units?
Is currently...
The greater than 15% grade?
Yes.
Yes.
15% across the board.
So that is being violated by the builders by all 3?
No, it's not violating anything.
Well, I'm
Does
just
it
saying...
Does it currently exist in all housing units, 1, 2, and 3 families?
Do you have a breakdown of how many units, single-family houses, that are built with more than 15% last year?
Our committee looked at it going back to 2012. It's most common in a 2-family situation, but you do have the occasional steep driveway in a single-family situation, and we chose the 15% grade because no matter whether it's a single-family or a 2-family or a 3-family, it's a public safety hazard.
I understand that, but my problem with this whole thing is you put the 15% with the number of parking spaces availability for a house. So now we're left in a dilemma, as I think a lot of my fellow meeting members, on how to vote this. So I'm leaning toward Chris Loretti's amendment. Thank you, and I hope you do too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mahon. The woman right next to her.
Hi, Stacy Smith, Precinct 3. I just have a question about the required vegetative buffers.
Yes. What's your question?
My question is, so if you have a house where there's a driveway right now that goes, a side driveway that goes up to the buffer, And if my house actually is a two-family house with 0 parking spaces, which I've been hoping to find some solution to since we pay a lot of money to park down the street. I was hoping we might be able to develop a driveway contiguous to the driveway that already exists of the other house. Would that, if there's not room for a new driveway and a vegetative buffer, is this saying that would no longer be allowed?
Mr. Bennell?
That's a little more specific than we can get into right now. You'd have to take that up with inspectional services. There are different rules as to what's allowed for driveways to begin with, curb cuts. This Article 8 applies to new construction of residences in town. So you'd have to take that up with inspectional services and see whether you could build something. If it were an existing, well, I don't want to get into speculation and hypotheticals here.
Just when it says new residential driveways and parking, you mean new residential buildings?
It's folded into new residential construction, yes.
Okay, because if you want to build a new driveway for an existing construction, we actually have a curb cut, but we don't have a driveway.
That's more specific and
Yeah.
out of scope of what we've intended here.
Okay.
This gentleman over here on the right side, 5 back. Nope, not you, sir. This guy here. Nope. Right across the aisle from you. You, yes.
Hi, Daniel Jalka, Precinct 6, 17 Randolph Street. I'm just sort of getting up to respond to what I think is kind of like a projection of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about the problems that might arise from giving people the option of reducing the number of parking spaces in property. In particular, I think more and more we're seeing in this town in particular, we're so close, especially in East Arlington, to things like transit, bike path. A lot of people ride bicycles. Try to take a point of view on this that considers how unfair it is to somebody who is building a house or who just bought a house. Some of the people who have bought houses or are building houses in this town are committed to never owning a single car and imposing on them that they have to put aside place in their house to accommodate this lifestyle they don't intend to take advantage of, or they don't intend to indulge. It's like they're going to have to use this parking space for storage anyway. I think we're like on the brink of people in general relying less and less on cars, especially as, I know somewhat to the chagrin of some people in this town, but we are becoming better connected with the urban center of Boston. We have bike paths extending. We have ride-sharing things are going to be coming down the road. More people than ever, I think, are using Uber, using Lyft. And I don't think that's going to do anything but increase over months and years to come. So I would be looking at this from the point of view, people have mentioned developers are going to just try to squeeze out all the square footage. Well, they have to still put this on the market and appeal to somebody. So I don't think a developer is going to go out of their way to make a property that they can't sell to anybody. So there's a little bit of an argument here, I think, to be made for let the developers who are putting their investment on the line decide whether they can make an attractive property that's going to appeal to somebody who sees the virtue of maybe only accommodating one car in their house behind the setback, and maybe they'll get another car, and if it does fit, I agree, they can put it in the driveway. Some of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, I think it may lead, some people have proposed, it may lead to appeals to the Board of Selectmen. I've seen the appeals to the Board of Selectmen for off-street parking. They are not very successful. They're pretty good at rejecting those appeals, and they reject them because they know they can't make a precedent of allowing that kind of thing to happen in a town like Arlington. So I just think I wanted to get up and make that case for the idea that it's not so much about preserving this long-standing rule we have is not going to it's not a panacea for everything wrong with parking in our town, and it hurts people who want to look forward to a time when many fewer of us will be driving and many fewer of us will have as many cars to store on our property. Thank you.
Okay, none of that. We're not the English Parliament. It's 9:30. We're going to take a 7-minute break, and then we're going to come back. This gentleman in the white hair is next. Please take your seats. I'm not going to turn your clock on yet.
It's like C-SPAN.
Quiet, please. Okay, sir. Name and address for the record.
My name is Patrick Hanlon. I live at 20 Park Street, and I represent Precinct 5. I rise in strong opposition to the amendment. I want to go back to the very first thing we heard before we got to the amendment, when we got to the main motion. The entire package that we have before us today, which includes the amendments on Article 8, and ultimately it will include some things we will hear on Wednesday that are related to the same general issue, are something that was worked out in a committee that was established as a result of very great difficulties that this group had last year in coming to a conclusion on a series of issues that are related to what we're talking about now. And there was a
Mr.
process.
Hanlon, can
Yes.
you lean a little closer to the microphone?
Okay. Does that help? There was a process.
Quiet in the hall. Go ahead, Mr. Hanlon.
There was a process that was established then, and it is a process that has worked. And we're going to hear more about it later on, and we've already seen that they have a busy agenda, and this process isn't over. It's a process that's going to continue to work. And a process of this kind always leads to compromises, and it always leads to some things that you like and some things that you don't like. What I think is that this process would be gravely injured if this meeting goes and picks and chooses and decides to take some of the parts of the compromise and to enact them into law and reject the parts that it doesn't want. You can do that now. We can all do that now. But I don't think that the people who lose are going to be very excited at going to the next meeting of the residential study group, and you know they have a lot more work that they need to do. So from my point of view, coming in here, I was ready to support the result of the progress, which includes things that I like better than some things I like and some things I like less, unless I was convinced that it was absolutely the wrong thing to do. And I'm not convinced that this is the wrong thing to do. If you want to see what all of these kinds of units look like, come to Park Street. About half of my block consists of new duplexes. I live in one of those new duplexes, and mine happens to have parking at grade. There are 2 units that have parking under grade, and there are also 1 unit that has been built with parking in the rear that is reached through a side lot. So it's practically a living experiment of what actually happens if the amendment that we have been asked to approve, that is to say the overall amendment, passes. Are these houses, the new duplexes, are they located really up close to the property line? Not at all. Mine is 28 and a half feet back. There's not one of them that is less than 20, and almost all of them, in fact, not just almost, every single one of them is further back than the houses that have been there for up to 100 years. So we're not talking about the new construction backing up to the sidewalk. Are there people parking in the driveways? Yes, there are people parking in the driveways. There's plenty of room to park on the driveways, and the pictures you see about obstructing the streets, they don't happen on Park Street. They don't happen on Park Street at the at grade levels, and they don't happen at the underground ones because nobody goes and parks in those steep slopes because it's too inconvenient to do so. So they put the cars underground. It seems to me that the analysis that's made of the residential study group is that the design, which generally we think undesirable, not just because it goes too low, the sleep is too much, but just because it's not a very good design in the house and it produces a neighborhood that is not as attractive as Arlington is used to, is being driven in part by a regulatory requirement that has a long tradition to it, as Mr. Loretti pointed out, but it is not suitable for the kind of development that's happening, infill development that's happening in Arlington today. So am I convinced that the compromise reached by the study group is absolutely perfect? No. Do I think it's a disaster? Clearly it is not a disaster. And in this kind of situation, I'm going to oppose the amendment and ultimately support the RSG's proposal and the redevelopment board's proposed language, because I want to keep this process going. Keeping it going is going to do more for Arlington than any particular matter that we may choose to pick on, any particular proposal that they may make. And I think that we owe a lot of gratitude to those people, and we ought to give them support, and we ought to give them the energy and the resources they need to keep on doing what they've been doing so well.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Tremblay?
Ed Tremblay, Precinct 19. The first point I'd like to make is that the previous speaker mentioned the Metropolitan Planning Council and how they suggested we have too much parking here. Well, that's the group that wants us to all ride bicycles. And the older I get, the less likely I am to do that, especially in the winter. Another point that I'd like to make is that the reason we have all these discussions and debates and everything is that we're trying to, or at least we should be, trying to take a long view. A previous speaker mentioned that it's not fair to somebody who has bicycles to build a house for cars. Well, I have a house that was built in the era of Model Ts, and the driveway is so narrow you can get a Model T up it, but not a car of today. So I think we ought to be taking the long view. Those people who buy a house and only have bicycles, someday will sell it. And the next people then will either be saddled like the lady who has no parking at her house. We have a number of houses around Arlington that have no parking. So I would submit that 2 parking spaces per unit is not a bad thing, particularly when I hear, and Mr. Moderator, could perhaps the Treasurer's Office could confirm this, that in 2009 there was something like 29,000 cars registered, and in 2012 or something like that there was maybe 34,000 cars, and now I hear we have 38. So actually the number of cars in town seems to be going up rather substantially. And so once again, I would submit that 2 parking spaces per unit is not a bad figure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Deist? Mr. Rearig?
Brian Rarig, Precinct 8. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have 2 questions. One is that there's a phrase in this proposed bylaw change that's a little unusual in my experience for the zoning bylaw, which is that it says side yards used for parking shall have a vegetated buffer when abutting a lot, this is the phrase, used for residential purposes. Typically in the zoning bylaw, something is defined by its zoning, not by its current use. And I'd be interested in knowing how the redevelopment board and perhaps inspectional services read this proposed language.
Mr. Burns is going to tell you what he thinks it says.
Evening, Michael Byrne, Director of Inspectional Services. Thanks for the question, Brian. We did talk about this quite a bit during our meetings. And it is just, if it's another residential property next to it, then that new house would have to have a buffer area between the driveway and that lot line, if that answers that question.
Mr. Moderator, so if, for example, there were 2 vacant lots side by side and I built a house on one of them, I wouldn't be required to put in a vegetated buffer on my driveway abutting that vacant lot. But if someone then used that vacant lot for residential use, that person would have to buffer the driveways.
Yes, they would.
That's okay.
Yes.
Thank you. You have any more?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes, I have a second question.
Yes.
There were some examples shown on the screen of cars parked across a sidewalk, because the setbacks of the houses that they were parked at had too small a setback from the street, and the reason they'd have a too small a setback to permit parking entirely in the front yard is the rule about a block being developed more than 50% with houses of a certain setback, that you can then mimic that setback with new construction. My question is parking across the sidewalk legal? Is this really a zoning issue, or is this a parking enforcement issue, which is to say, can the police ticket someone who parks as in the examples that we were shown?
So I think it's a two-part question. Mr. Byrne can answer if they're legal, and then we'll ask Mr. Chief Ryan if he can ticket.
The zoning bylaw requires parking, there's two places you park on the driveway leading to the required spaces, which would be on the front line of the house, which would be what we're talking here, a lot of garages. But to my belief and my knowledge, well, zoning certainly does not allow you to park across a sidewalk or to infringe upon that pedestrian walkway or driveway or street at all. From what I understand, I'm not, but from police, that would be a ticketable offense to block that sidewalk from what I understand.
Chief Ryan's left. Doug Heim, Town Council, can answer the question that if the officers can ticket.
Good evening, Doug Heim, Town Council. You can't obstruct the public way, which is part of the, most sidewalks are part of the public way. My understanding of the police department's practice on this is typically that they'll ask somebody to move rather than ticket them, but the point remains the same. You don't have the right to obstruct the public way with your car. Thanks.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now you, sir. No, not you, Mr. Revlak, the gentleman in the sunglasses. You finally get your turn.
Peter Gast, Precinct 2. I think that the vast majority of us are in favor of the 15% slope reduction as a safety issue. I think there's a significant amount of disagreement and debate on the 1 versus 2 dwelling units. But the thing that I was coming up here to speak on is the vegetative buffer. In Somerville, I deal with a property that has a vegetative buffer, and the net effect is that the plants intrude on the driveway and make it much more difficult to get in and out of cars there. And so I don't find it a useful enhancement to the property. So I'm wondering, sorry. So I find this clause to be much less justified than the other 2 major points of this. So I would be interested in a motion to remove this third part.
Well, see, that's what you're supposed to call me for in the last 2 weeks. You have to take one of these little pieces of paper. You got to write an amendment. You got to get someone to second it, and then you got to tell us why it's such a good idea. And it has to be brief and concise so that all of those guys can understand it.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Wren?
Donna Wren, Precinct 10. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So I rise in support of Article 8 and against Chris Loretti's proposed, or Mr. Sharp's proposed amendment. Last time I got up and talked about parking was, I think, my first year on town meeting when we talked about zip cars, and I got up and said, we are a one-car family. We are still a one-car family. It has been 22 years. We're a family of 4. We can do this, and we moved to Arlington specifically because Arlington is a community that allows for that flexibility. It allows us to use public transportation. It allows us to walk places. And we've been able to do this for a very long time. In my professional life, I work at Mount Auburn Hospital now. I work with new families with new babies, many of whom are moving into Arlington, a lot of them into East Arlington in particular. And quite a few of them, when I sit down and say, hey, don't you love living in Arlington? And they say, yes, we love it. And they almost always talk about everything that they can do. They talk about the public transportation, and quite often these new families moving to Arlington specifically say that they're coming there because they like the public transportation, they like the proximity to the city, and they don't plan on having a lot of cars of their own. So I think, again, supporting this flexibility of having the option of having fewer spaces, having more space in their house for other things, I really think that it is doable. I think it may, call it the wave of the future if you want. I think that people, many are moving away from having multiple cars, and I'm proof that after 22 years, it is really possible with teenagers to have one car.
Thank you, Ms. Wren. Mr. Moore? Mr. Starr?
Ed Starr, Precinct 15. I move the question on the amendment and the main motion.
We have a motion to terminate debate on the article and all that matters before it. Well, it's been seconded. Mr. Lathwood. As soon as we're ready, 1 for terminating debate, 2 for keep talking about it. And go. Vote 1 for yes to terminate, 2 to continue to discuss the article. No, they were good. Is an affirmative vote, 190 positive, 21 of the negative. It is 2/3. Debate is terminated. That brings us to the actual voting. We have before us the recommended vote of the ARB, and we have also Mr. Sharp's amendment to eliminate the portion reducing the parking from 2 to 1. So first we're going to vote on the amendment, and we'll see if that's yes or no. Then we'll vote on the main article. So as soon as Mr. Lathwood is ready, what you're voting on is, I'm about to tell you. So what we're voting on is whether or not we want to accept the amendment to reduce parking from 2 spaces, to keep it at 2 spaces. So we're going to vote, do you want to keep it at 2, or do you want to go with the recommended vote of 1? So if you want to amendment, the recommended vote is 1. Chris Loretti, Ted Sharp's amendment says get rid of that, keep it at 2 votes. Put the amendment up there, David. What? The amendment. Deleting the words and amending the article, section 8.01. I don't care what they say. I'm telling you what we're voting on. And amending Article 8, Section 8.01, off-street parking requirements, and continuing through the end of the article. So they want to delete, Mr. Sharp wants to delete the very last portion of the recommended vote. There's his amendment. If you want that amendment, you will vote 1. If you do not want the amendment, you will vote 2. Is that clear now? Okay. So if you want the amendment, 1. If you don't, vote 2. It's a negative vote, 37 in favor, 172 opposed. The amendment fails. We now have before us the recommended vote of the ARB, as noted in their report. As soon as Mr. Lathwood is ready, 1, yes, you want. 2, you don't. All in favor, please vote 1. All who oppose, vote 2. It is an affirmative vote, 200 in the positive, 13 in the negative. It is a two-thirds vote. 200 to 13. And that closes debate on Article 8, brings us to Article 9. Article 9, we have a recommended vote of no action. Article 9, we have a recommended vote of no action. All in favor of no action, please say yes. Yes. All opposed, say no. It's a unanimous vote of no action. I so declare it. That closes Article 9, brings us to Article 10. We have another article, recommended vote of no action. All in favor of no action, please say yes. Yes. All opposed, say no. It's a unanimous vote of no action. I so declare it. That closes Article 10, brings us to Article 11. Mr. Coro.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. With your permission, I'd like to discuss Articles 11 through 14 as a bundle.
11 through?
11 through 14.
Okay, so
as a
we're
bundle.
going to, 11 through 14 are kind of all tied together. So we're going to discuss 11 through 14 at once, and then we'll take individual votes on each article.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. The articles before you also represent some more work of the residential study group. The Board of Selectmen did recommend favorable action on all of the recommendations that were brought before us. Article 11 concerns notices to abutters regarding demolitions, open foundation excavation, new construction, or large additions. It recognizes the fact that in the course of major construction or demolition projects, there can be disruptions to abutters, and it does implement some common sense notification requirements. I'll note that during the board's discussion of Article 11, we did discuss with the definition of abutters, which has traditionally been defined by the property owners themselves, and we did request that some language be included here, which is in the recommended vote before you, to make best efforts to also contact other abutters, including residents who may be renters of properties in proximity. Articles 12 and 13 both concern some common sense site control and maintenance requirements. I know the residential study group is prepared to speak in more detail on this. And lastly, Article 14 makes some small amendments to the noise abatement bylaw concerning the permitted operating times, shrinking some of the windows slightly to so as to try to reduce early morning disruptions and on weekends. I do know that the members of the residential study group are prepared to speak in more detail to each of the specific provisions of these articles. Thank you.
Mr. Klein?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Christian Klein, Precinct 10. I rise because I have an amendment to Article 11, which was left on chairs and was emailed out. I apologize for my midnight posting of warrant article revisions, which led to a couple of typos, so this was issued twice. I apologize for that. Essentially, all I'm seeking to do is in Section B, where it says the notice required herein shall at a minimum contain, I want to add the words contact information for the developer or contractor ahead of a site plan. And essentially the reason is very simple, is when you receive this notice, it's good to know who you actually need to pose your questions back to. And so that's the entire reasoning for this amendment.
Do I have a second on that? Seconded. All right, it's been seconded. It's before us now. Mr. Berkowitz.
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. Bill Berkowitz, Precinct 8. I have a question in particular on Article 11, which as I read it, I just want to make sure what we're voting on is a notification only provision, meaning that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that if a developer or anybody wants to have an excavation that is that the neighbors might view as quite noxious, perhaps akin to what happened at 108 Irving over previous summer, that this amendment, this article, does not address the quality or the, let's say, the noxiousness of the proposal for excavation. It only speaks to the question of notice of the of the abutters. So we might say, and consistent with the article that we're being asked to vote on, that we hypothetically are proposing what you may consider a noxious development, but we are fulfilling our responsibility to you by hereby notifying you of the things, the negative things, in quotes, that we plan to do. I'd be interested if anybody who's proposing this amendment would like to respond to that.
Mr. Berkowitz?
Yeah.
I think I called you prematurely. Mr. Oster has a presentation that's going to address all of your questions, I believe. So if you want to, I'll call you after he's done. You can readdress your questions.
That's fine, but I would hope that either Mr. Oster or somebody else would address those questions.
Yep, and I'll give you a chance right after they're done to, if you haven't been satisfied with your answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Oster.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Adam Oster from Precinct 3, and I'm also a member of this committee. And I wanted to, we'll be sort of passing the microphone around to explain these 4 articles that we're bringing in front of you at the same time. If we didn't, we would be able to present 4 different presentations of 7 minutes each. We don't need that, but Mr. Moderator, I would like the meeting's indulgence for 10 minutes of presentations.
They've requested 10 minutes to do the 4 articles. All in favor of 10 minutes, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? You have your 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Early on in our work, we planned a number of site visits to view some of the different kinds of development that was going on. We visited in one neighborhood a place where the smallest house in the neighborhood had been demolished and replaced by a larger house. We visited the infamous house where there had been chipping and drilling of ledge work over an extended period, and we visited another house where a farmhouse had been replaced with a below-grade garage development. And this was initially really going to be inspectional services walking us through what they do, what their considerations are, so that we'd have a better understanding of how zoning works and what we might consider and not consider. But an interesting thing happened when we set up in front of these places, and inspectional services had a little easel and they'd have photos and things on it, is that all the neighbors came out to find out what we were doing there, and when they found out, to tell us what their issues had been. And a lot of the issues were, I don't like that house, it doesn't fit, it's too big, it's this, but a lot of them were about the process. We had no idea what is going on. This has gone on forever. There's no information about it. And from that experience, this set of articles was born. It wasn't something we had initially set out to do. These aren't actually zoning articles at all. These are amendments to the town bylaws. They're not amendments to the zoning bylaws. So partly, I guess, to answer Mr. Berkowicz's questions, these are pretty modest. They do not, in fact, convey to abutters or residents significant new rights. They don't impose, we feel, big burdens on developers either. But they're all things that we think represent improvements. I hope they're not the last word. For my part, in particular, I'd like to see us do more about noise. but I think they're all worthy of your consideration. And at this time, I'd like to call on Bill Copthorne to present the next part of this presentation.
Mr. Copperthorne's a resident of the town. Go ahead, Mr. Copperthorne.
Thank you, Adam, for that introduction. You know, what we're proposing...
Name and address.
Bill Copperthorne, 15 Cornell Street, member of the Residential Zoning Study Group.
Thank you.
I'm here to talk about Articles 11, 12, and 13, which are parts of what we're calling the Good Neighbor notifications, Good Neighbor Agreement. Article 11 specifically talks about neighborhood notifications. It's going to require require notification to neighbors within 200 feet of all construction and excavation projects involving demolition and or large additions within 7 days prior to the start of any site work or within 7 days of applying for a building permit, whichever comes first. Notification to include a site plan, hours of operation, anticipated completion date, a work schedule, health and safety, abutting property protections, and noise abatement measures if applicable. It expands upon the definitions of demolition to the raising of more than 50% of a building, open foundation excavation for the purpose of constructing or expanding a residential building foundation, and for large additions being the increase in size of a building by more than 750 square feet or more, or by 50% or more of the existing building's gross floor area. The applicant for a permit shall demonstrate to the satisfaction of the building inspector that the proper notice was given prior to the issuance of a demolition or building permit or commencing on open foundation excavations. Violations of this bylaw will be subject to daily fines upon notice of the building inspector. I just wanted to note, we did have a quick discussion, and we are in favor of the proposed amendment by Mr. Klein in adding the contact information for the owner or developer. That was an omission on our part. Articles 12 and 13 are pretty much tied together, and the purpose of these articles is to establish construction site maintenance requirements for residential demolition, open foundation excavation, new construction, and large addition projects in the interest of minimizing adverse impacts on the neighboring community and promoting public health and safety. These will require the owner, the primary contractor, or builder to keep the site in a neat and orderly condition, requiring daily site maintenance with construction equipment and materials stored in safe and secure locations. So further help protect abutters from excess dirt, debris, and noise. It will describe guidelines for predictable, safe, and neat construction sites. It will require the installation of drive pads to keep public and private ways clean. And once again, will impose fines for violations as determined by the Inspectional Services Department. Thank you. And Adam is back to introduce why now.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just want to introduce another committee member to present on the remaining article, Winnell Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Hi, everybody. Article 14 is part of the suite of...
Yeah, hello. ID yourself, name.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My name is Winnell Evans. I'm a member of the Residential Study Group, and I live at 20 Orchard Place. Article 14 is part of this suite of articles that aim to address construction impacts in residential neighborhoods. It came about as a very direct response to the concerns that were expressed in the surveys that we sent out, and as Adam mentioned, in the site visits we conducted, where noise was one of the main complaints. An interesting and related finding of the survey was that almost 60% of Arlington residents who responded are at home all day long, whether they work out of their homes whether they are retired, whether they are working raising children out of their home, whatever the case may be. So noise is a really significant factor to a large number of residents. The residential study group is proposing adjustments to the existing noise abatement bylaw to reduce the allowed hours for certain construction-related activities and to provide some relief to neighbors during the early morning and evening hours. These adjustments will limit the use of heavy equipment and of drilling, demolition, and earth-moving activities to the hours between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekends and holidays, and 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays. Other types of construction work can begin and end at the currently allowed times of 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekends and holidays, and 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekdays. Heavy equipment is defined in the current bylaw as commercial or industrial equipment such as motorized earth-moving equipment, jackhammers, pavement breakers, pile drivers, trucks for loading and unloading dumpsters, tractor trailers, and parking lot maintenance equipment. There are several activities that are accepted from this regulation, and that would be, of course, emergency work, snow removal, blasting, and the use of leaf blowers, which is already covered in the existing noise abatement regulations. Yeah, I'm with you. As well as domestic power equipment, such as a homeowner might use, including lawn and garden tools, drills, power saws, and chainsaws. Enforcement of all the existing and proposed noise bylaws falls to the Board of Health, and the town perhaps will be considering additional amendments to this bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from your committee? No. Okay. So, Mr. Berkowitz.
Thanks. Bill Berkowitz, Precinct 8. I have two comments. One is, the first one regards Article 11 again. And while I do appreciate the activities, greatly appreciate the activities of the residential study group, I do note that Mr. Oster said just a moment ago that these proposals are modest. I agree that they're modest, as in very modest or itty-bitty modest. And they don't address the merits of the proposed development. I think if we were to vote positively on Article 11 as amended, or with or without amendment, we would have to agree that this represents a down payment on future proposals that the RSG might deliver to us, a very small down payment, and hold the RSG, as any group, accountable for proposing future proposals in different town meetings, future town meetings, that would address some of the inequities that I view emerged from development in Arlington over the past, that has occurred over the past year or two. Second comment, regarding Article 14, which I certainly approve of, I do not see in the article any enforcement mechanism, which to me is unfortunate given that I have heard from abutters of these developments that the noise guidelines are, in their view, are routinely unobserved. It would be hard for me to vote positively for this article without being clear what the enforcement mechanism for violation of the hours stipulated in the article would be. Again, I would encourage response from either anybody in the RSG or anybody else who's a stakeholder in this particular article. Thank you.
Mr. Hahn, what would be the enforcement mechanism for the Board of Health? Can they issue fines? Can they order stop issue? Ah.
Christine Bongiorno, Health and Human Services Director. Typically, when the Board of Health receives a complaint regarding noise, an inspector will go out to the site and will determine if a violation is occurring and will issue an order to stop the violation. So we typically will do a warning and then we'll issue fines and or take the violator to court if necessary.
Can you tell us what the fines would be on a typical, they're not paying attention? How much
It
can
would
you
be a
fine them?
bylaw violation. I believe it's 20. I would have to ask Attorney Heim that specific bylaw violation. I don't know if it's a 20 or a 50. Honestly, I'm not the one out there on the street writing the tickets.
So there's different categories of bylaw violations. There's a general bylaw violation, and then there's a greater violation that has to be stipulated specifically. I don't believe this was in the scope of what the residential study group contemplated in terms of putting in some further specific violation rather than the general bylaws violation. Thank you.
So basically, it's a bylaw violation. It's going to be somewhere between 25 and $50 for the first violation. Ms. LaCourte.
Annie LaCourte, Precinct 15. I have a couple of specific questions on Article 11. Did the Residential Study Committee in any way consider whether or not the documentation they are requesting be available to abutters is the standard kind of documentation that a project developer would need to produce for the sake of his own operations? Or do you anticipate that these will be items that have to be produced specifically for this purpose? And is there any plan to provide some kind of a template for developers so that they know exactly what they're expected to produce, so that it's clear to them that they have met the requirements of the bylaw? And finally, one more thing. Did anybody consider the possibility of suggesting that these materials could be provided electronically on a website rather than by being required to be mailed? Or that notice that said materials were available at the building inspector's office where they have to be filed is sufficient to provide the materials to the abutters?
Mr. Heim, did you want to answer that? Or do you want Mr. Oster to handle it? Okay. Mr. Oster, are you prepared to answer that? Wait, you have to get to the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'll give a short answer, and maybe if it's not satisfactory, the planning department will be able to answer. You want to take this one?
I think you've made a hot potato. Mr. Byrne.
Let me just give the short answer. You can
Standard
follow
PM
up.
question.
I'll just say that we did consider a lot of those points, and this is still our recommendation. But you probably want more answer than that. I'm going to turn it over.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Oster.
Michael Byrne, Director of Inspectional Services. Obviously, this is all new to us, and Rick and I have been trying to figure out how we'll all work this. And then we do foresee some sort of checklist of things that would need to be satisfied before our issuance. I know that was one question. What was, someone was talking while the next question came up.
Let me just give you the overall picture of what I'm trying to get at here, Mike. Okay? In order for somebody to build a house, they have to produce a certain amount of paperwork.
Yep.
In order for them to do a schedule, to know when equipment is arriving, to say how long the project's going to take, they got to produce all that stuff for themselves.
Yep.
The question here is, will the documentation they have to produce for themselves satisfy this requirement? And will the filing of it with your office, for example, and it being available to the public there or in the library or on a website, satisfy the need to get it to all the abutters within 200 feet? It seems to me like producing a huge stack of documentation and mailing it out to every potential abutter adds a lot of work for a contractor. Let me, okay.
So do you understand the question, sir?
I do.
Okay, so what I'm trying to get at is, are we able to be flexible while satisfying what the abutters need, while doing our best to provide the detailed information in the best way possible? I think mailing a packet may not be as good as posting to a website, and I also think that expecting the developer to understand what they're supposed to produce if it isn't their normal documentation will require providing them with specifics, or they're going to be constantly in violation of this bylaw.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think what we're doing, we were pretty much copying, say, like a zoning board hearing with the 200-foot radius and the butters list, this type of that stuff.
Right.
Now, the specific information is obviously is different, and we would expect to have this before we issue the permit. So do I see a reason? Eventually, I could see evolving it, if we needed to go into some sort of electronic media with it. But that's not the way. I don't know if I'd have to speak to council and whether we could, if that's considered notice. I'm not quite sure, but
I think Mr. Chapdelaine and Mr. Bennell want to address your question.
Sure. You just don't want me to make my speech.
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. I just wanted to make the point that I'm not sure if it was fully made yet. The intention of Articles 11 through 14 is to create what we're going to call either a good neighbor agreement or a construction control agreement, which will codify everything that we're talking about here tonight, as well as what already exists into the bylaw, into an agreement between the town and the developer about how they're going to behave on the site. And part of that will be including a template for how we expect them to transmit this information. I think with the people around the table at the residential study group, we didn't feel as though this would be an overwhelming impediment or burden on developers to be able to provide this information in terms of the notification. And I think Mr. Byrne just said this. I think we want to start with what's being proposed, and if we eventually move to an electronic platform, if we feel as though sending a mailing to abutters notifying them of an electronic platform could be something we look at. I don't think we're averse to that, but I think we want to start with guaranteeing that we're putting the paper in front of people, they can open the envelope and pay some attention to it.
Okay. So,
Do you need additional explanation, or are you all set?
I think I'm all set. I understand all the hissing in the background. I know we all think developers are bad guys, but they're not. They're guys trying to make a buck, and people have a right to modify their homes, to build a new home on a property, so on and so forth. You don't want to impinge on somebody's property rights. It's usually their major investment and the only thing that they own that's of that amount of value. And yeah, I say that as a tax and spend socialist liberal, yada, yada, yada. What my experience on the Board of Selectmen was that if I simply could get a contractor to agree to meet with the neighbors in one 90-minute sit-down, all these problems went away and a communication channel was opened up. So I would hope that that will be the result of these articles, which I will support despite the fact that they seem a little overkill to me, because that's the real way to solve this problem, is to develop a relationship and for people to be talking to each other who are both doing the construction and affected by it, not by some checklist of hoops everybody's got to jump through that you think will solve the problem. So, my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jelcutt? Okay. Go ahead. Mr. Jelcutt, just stand right there. Mr. Hines going to...
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry I misspoke earlier, and I think it's important to correct this matter because it's germane to this debate. I'm Doug Heim, Town Council. The Health Director and I were correct in the sense that there is a warning and there can be a cease and desist, but it's not a general bylaw fine, although it's processed in a similar way. It's $200 per offense. I apologize for that error. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That is important information. Mr. Jelcutt, you're up.
Hi, Daniel Jalcutt, Precinct 6, 17 Randolph Street. Mr. Moderator, is it appropriate to ask questions about the amendment on the floor? I have a common sense reaction that I think it sounds like the redevelopment board and the committee share, that this proposed amendment to add a requirement for contact information for the developer or contractor sounds like it makes sense. My concern is, I think I learned sort of last year that there is generally a concern about making little fiddly changes to zoning things, and so I would just like to make sure we really understand what the impact of this is. Something that jumps out to me is whether there's any ambiguity introduced by saying that a notice would have to contain contact information for the developer or contractor. I don't know, that just kind of jumps out to me. I guess, Mr. Moderator, I would appreciate a legal interpretation of this, whether this would change any like legal interpretation of the proposed bylaw?
Okay, Mr. Heim, then Mr. Bennell. Go ahead, Mr. Heim. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Andrew Bonnell, Chair of the Arlington Redevelopment Board. I've also been a member of the Residential Study Group. The reason the language specifies between developer and contractor is because these bylaw amendments, town bylaw amendments, not zoning bylaw amendments, to be clear, apply not only to new home construction, but also residential additions over 750 square feet, which are already subject to the ZBA and special permit process, which can be led by a contractor rather than a developer at the behest of a homeowner.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, sort of in the line of whether it's adding complexity, again, not here as a super cheerleader for developers, but in the interest of keeping the law as simple as possible. Is it, I'm not super familiar with what is typically in a site plan, but I might have assumed that every site plan would have the developer or contractor information in it. So, Mr. Moderator, if anybody has a clarification on that point, I'd appreciate it.
I don't understand the question, sir.
Well, what I'm asking is whether it's redundant to require that specifically contact information be included, or if that's something that would always be in the site plan. In other words, there's many things that would be in a site plan that are not enumerated here, and that keeps the proposed law, bylaw, simpler than it otherwise would be.
Mr. Bennell?
That depends. Andrew Bonnell, Chair of the Arlington Redevelopment Board and a member of the RSG. The answer is it depends on the site plan and depends how crafted it is. It would really be, in some cases, site plans are a little more difficult to read than others, so putting it up front and center as to where to contact, who to contact and where to complain if necessary makes sense, and as has been said, the RSG does support Mr. Klein's amendment.
Thank you. Given the clarifications, I intend to support Article 11 through 14. And I encourage you all to do so as well.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Howard?
Peter Howard, Precinct 10. I have a question about Article 14. I don't understand why there is no noise volume limitation in this proposed bylaw. I understand during some of the discussions that were held in advance in reviewing the warrant that on the Irving Street property where there was a great deal of noise for essentially the whole summer, much of it above the levels that are, reportedly at least, above the levels that are allowed, nothing happened. The town didn't do anything. Why was that? Can we get some answers to that, Mr. Moderator?
Board of Health? Ms. Bongiorno? I believe you were called, your office was called up to that site.
Christine Bongiorno, Health and Human Services Director. So the Board of Health was called out to the Irving Street site on a number of occasions by a number of residents abutting the property. Noise measurements were taken. Our regulations currently state that the noise is to be taken 50 feet from the, at the property line. And the decibel levels were below the permissible levels, which is 85 decibels. There was one point at which it hit just slightly over that. We did work with the contractor to limit the hours of operation. So we decreased the hours from to 4 p.m. So it was 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. that he was allowed to work during the week. And he was permitted to work on the weekend, mostly Saturdays. I believe he chose not to. Again, it was a matter of just coming together with the residents as well as the contractor to come up with a solution that worked for the majority. I hope that answers your question.
I'm not sure I fully understood that, but I think she said that they tried, but they couldn't do anything. The residential study community, the residential study group attempted to get something done about the noise levels. Could we hear something about why that, what happened, why that didn't happen?
Ms. Pyle?
Elizabeth Pyle, Precinct 10, member of the Residential Study Group. I absolutely hear what you're saying. The Residential Study Group wanted to address this issue. We had a fellow town meeting member, John Martin, who's a noise expert, come in and make a presentation to us. We wanted to look at changing the decibel level, and we were told that it was not within our purview and that only the Board of Health could do that. So this is not something that we were permitted to look at.
Mr. Moderator, there seems to be a internal problem in the town administration. Could perhaps the town manager would understand what's going on here?
Mr. Chapdelaine? I think Mr. Howard wants you to lower that decibel level. How does he go about doing it?
Adam Chapdelaine, town manager.
Oh.
So I'll try to cover several of Mr. Howard's points. So to be clear, there is a decibel limit within the existing bylaw. So attempts at creating a decibel level were not ignored. They already exist at the 85 decibel level that Ms. Bongiorno mentioned earlier. So the question of why action wasn't taken, I think, is a matter of a review that was done by the Board of Health. I guess perhaps I wasn't at the meeting that Ms. Pyle referenced where the committee was told that it couldn't make a recommendation to take action, but my understanding was that Ms. Bongiorno, and perhaps I should let her speak for herself more, is of the opinion that the 85 decibel level is in conformance with most of our neighboring communities, that is actually one of the lower decibel levels. Many communities allow a higher decibel level. I would by no means take off the table that the residential study group couldn't continue to look at it in cooperation with the Board of Health and see if there are adjustments to be made. But I don't think that we're in any current situation where our decibel level permits far greater noise emission than other communities or other comparable bylaws.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Schlickman?
Paul Schlickman, Precinct 9, motion to terminate debate on all matters under all 4 articles and the amendment.
We've got a motion to terminate debate on all 4 articles, including all matters on each of those articles. It's been seconded. Point of order. Sir.
Mr. Klein had 3 amendments. I think he only brought forward one of them.
One of his other amendments was Article 17, I believe, Mr. Klein. 2 of them were under Article 17. They weren't under any of these 4, sir. Thank you, sir. You're welcome, sir. Mr. Lathwood, when you're ready. This is the motion to terminate debate. All in favor of terminating debate will press 1. All opposed will press 2. Wow, that's one bright bulb. Debate is terminated. 177 in the affirmative, 29 in the negative. We now have before us the recommended votes of the ARB on Articles 11, 12, 13, and 14. We'll vote each of those separately. Mr. Hine, you told me that there was a motion to consolidate 12 and 13. I don't believe anyone's brought that motion before us. Because they're essentially the same.
Ladies and gentlemen, Town Council Doug Heim, under Articles 12 and 13, the Board of Selectmen recommended a single vote, which covers both articles. So whether you choose to consolidate them or you take one vote under Article 12 or 13 is purely a procedural matter. but it's a single vote to encompass both Articles 12 and 13. Thank you.
That was in their comments section. All right. So first we'll take up Mr. Klein's amendment on Article 12. If you wish to have Mr. Klein's amendment, you'll vote 1. 11. It's late. Mr. Klein's amendment on Article 11. If you wish to have his amendment, you'll vote 1. If you do not wish, you'll vote 2. So go ahead and vote 1 for yes for the amendment, 2 for no. The amendment is accepted, 195 in the affirmative, 9 in the negative. We now have before us a recommended vote of the ARB as amended by Mr. Klein's amendment. All in favor will press 1. All opposed will press 2. Go ahead and vote. 1 for yes, 2 for no. It is a majority vote, 205 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative. It's a vote, and I so declare it. That terminates debate on Article 11 and brings us to Article 12. 13. So we'll take a vote on Article 12, and the Article 12 vote will also apply to Article 13 because they're essentially the same, and that's also as a recommendation of the Board of Selectmen, but it wasn't part of their vote. So Article 12, all in favor of Article 12, press 1. All opposed, press 2. Go ahead and vote. You got that for your records? Okay. It's an affirmative vote. 205 in the affirmative, 4 in the negative. That vote applies to Article 13 as well, and that disposes of 12 and 13. That brings us to Article 14. All in favor of the recommended vote of Article 14 of the ARB, please vote 1 for yes, 2 for no when we get the green light. Go ahead and vote. 1 for yes, 2 for no. That also is an affirmative vote, 199 in the affirmative, 9 in the negative. It's a positive vote, and I so declare that ends Article 14 and brings us to Article 15. Mr. Coro.
Mr. Moderator, I respectfully move to postpone consideration of this matter until Wednesday, April 26th.
Second, we have a motion to postpone to Wednesday, April 26th, and 2 days hence. All in favor, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? It is so postponed till Wednesday. 4/26. We have before us now Article 16. We have a recommended vote of no action on Article 16. All in favor of no action, please say yes. Yes. All opposed? It's a unanimous vote for no action, and I so declare it. That brings us to closes Article 16 and brings us to Article 17.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
No. Mr. Coro, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 17 seeks to regulate the use of plastic bags in retail restaurant establishments with specific defined exceptions. After hearing, this was a 10 registered voter article that was brought to our attention. I think after hearing the environmental arguments, specifically around the lack of biodegradability of this type of bag and the impact on water resources, of which we have many in Arlington, marine life, we were persuaded to support the proposal that was put before us. We were also persuaded in part because after learning that this is not an uncommon measure. It's been taken by over 42 other communities in the Commonwealth already. And there was also a demonstration of quite a bit of research and contact and outreach that was done to the retail community within Arlington, including to small business owners that have experience both in our community and in other communities that have already instituted similar measures. I know that some of the proponents of the article do have more extensive information to present to the meeting, and we respectfully request your support of the recommended vote of the Board of Selectmen.
Mr. Klein?
Christian Klein, Precinct 10. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. There was a very brief amendment to this article. In one of the lines where it talks about the thickness of the plastic for the bags, it inadvertently listed the units as millimeters, where it should have been mils. So it should have been in thousandths of an inch instead of in millimeters, because otherwise your plastic bag is 3/16 of an inch thick. So I had originally proposed this to the moderator and asked if this could be accepted administratively, and I don't know if that's still an option.
Yes, that's is an option. I'll put you on the list. Okay, so we'll make that change administratively, so go ahead and correct that on your recommended vote. That is obviously a typographical error, we don't have to vote on that one. Mr. Schlickman.
Paul Schlickman, Precinct 9. I rise to offer an amendment that is on your seats. There are many exceptions in this bylaw, including the ability to go to the store and get a plastic bag when you purchase your tomatoes so the tomatoes don't get wet. Your Sunday paper comes in a plastic bag, and that would be exempted because everybody knows how unpleasant it is to find a Sunday paper or newspaper on your front lawn or in your driveway that is wet, so the plastic's appropriate. Now, just the same, I live in a condo, and the papers are delivered indoors, and Sunday was sunny, and I still got the plastic bag. But essentially, how much difference is there between your Sunday paper and this? This is a used paperback book. And the quality of the paper isn't really wonderful in a used paperback book, but people still buy and sell them. We have a business in town that specializes in them. And I submit to you that getting this wet and getting this wet is somewheres in the same league. So with that in mind, I'm offering amendment to change subsection A number 3 to expand newspaper bags to permitting the retail sale of paperback books or books to also have plastic bags so they don't get wet when you buy them on a wet day. Thank you.
Do I have a second for Mr. Schlickman's article? Second. Thank you, sir. Ms. Mayman? Mr. Logan?
William Logan, Precinct 2. I just had a question. I don't know who to address it to, but will this allow the businesses to charge us for paper bags, or can they just do that on their own? Or
Mr. Coro?
Joe Curo, Chair of Board of Selectmen. This does not require a charge for bags as Cambridge does. They have an option of you can pay for the bag or not. I think as far as charging for the bag, that's the option of the retailer themselves.
Thank you. I support that.
Mr. Tully?
Joe Tully, Precinct 14. Just a brief observation on Mr. Schlickman's amendment, generally speaking, somebody doesn't drive around at 5 a.m. before the sun is up throwing your paperback books on your front step. One generally goes to the store and walks out with them and probably has some means by which to protect them. But the reason I rose my hand was that, and I apologize if this was answered earlier as I was late to the meeting. However, I did not receive my packet, and I understand I'm not alone in that. Is it possible to put the verbiage of what we're voting on more than just the comment? Can we have the actual description up there as to what it is?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Brazil?
Julie Brazil, Precinct 12. I'm not comfortable. I would not support Paul's amendment. I don't think it's a good idea to start by making exceptions for one type of retail establishment. Lots of people are going to need to develop new habits when they shop. That's a good thing. And I think getting rid of the plastic bags without confusion is a better goal for Arlington, and I just think the amendment increases the confusion unnecessarily.
Thank you. Mr. Foskett?
Charles Foskett, Precinct 8. I like plastic bags. I think they work. They're inexpensive. They hold food. And I don't see thousands of them floating through the streets in Arlington. I don't think it's a problem that has to be solved. I think they're beneficial for the community. They're clean. They're healthy. Put food in them that doesn't leak out. Why are we trying to fix something that's not broken?
Thank you. I believe it's Mr. Balin.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jim Ballin, Precinct 6.
Mr. Balin has the floor.
I had intended to do a presentation with fellow town meeting member Greg Dennis, and we wanted to request 10 minutes to do that.
All in favor of giving the gentleman 10 minutes for his presentation. He was the original person that brought this proponent of the article. All in favor of 10 minutes, please say yes. Yes. All opposed? You have your 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you. The proponents of this warrant article are, including myself, Greg Dennis.
Name and precinct.
Jim Ballin, Precinct 6.
Okay. Thank you.
The proponents of this warrant article are myself, Greg Dennis, Jim DiTullio, and Laura Kiesel. I'm going to share the presentation with Greg Dennis this evening. This is going to be very brief. There is a more detailed background information in a frequently asked question guide that we have prepared. We sent that to many of you. Unfortunately, we did not get copies available. We will have those copies available on Wednesday. The proposed bylaw language was developed in consultation with the town manager's office, the director of Health and Human Services, and the town council. And the copy of the proposed bylaw is in the selectmen's report. Let me just go over very quickly what the proposed bylaw would do. It is simply to ban single-use plastic bags provided at checkout in retail stores and restaurants in Arlington. It would exempt paper bags and other plastic bags. The type of plastic bags we're talking about are things such as the newspaper bags, which, as you heard, those are bags that are provided by, for example, the Boston Globe that throws it on your front lawn. Produce bags in the grocery stores that you use to bring your produce to the checkout. Dry cleaning bags, prepackaged food, wrapped meats, and of course, paper bags. In terms of implementation, the large retailers will have until March 1st of next year to comply, small retailers until July 1st. That gives them over a year for the small retailers to come into compliance and use up their existing stock of plastic bags. Enforcement would be by the Board of Health with a warning for the first violation and only subject to penalties for subsequent violations. We know from experience with many other cities and towns that have bans that enforcement, there's very little enforcement required for a plastic bag ban. There will be no fees for paper bags or plastic, and that's because the Attorney General's office does not allow towns to do that. Again, for more information on that, the frequently asked question guide we will provide you will give you more details on that. In terms of how many plastic bags we do use, these numbers are pretty staggering. It's the number one consumer product that we use. It's about 100 billion plastic bags in the U.S. It's over 2 billion in Massachusetts. If you extrapolate to Arlington, that's at least 1 million plastic bags per month. Grocery stores typically will provide about 20,000 plastic bags per week. In terms of how common these kind of bans are, the answer is very common. In Massachusetts, prior to this town meeting season, there were 42 other cities and towns with bans. 5 of them are already voted in the affirmative. That brings the number up to 47. This map shows you the ones in green that have already been approved. The ones in yellow are pending. There are at least another 7, including Arlington, that have votes coming up this spring. We think that number will get up to over 50 in a matter of the next month or two. The number of people affected by these bans are over 1 million people in Massachusetts. We have more local bans in Massachusetts than any other state besides California. In fact, there are so many bans that the state Senate last year passed a statewide ban. It did not pass the House, but we think that is the direction this is going, with a rate of about a dozen new cities and towns coming on board with these bans each year. It's only a matter of time before the state decides to do it statewide. That's what's happened in California and Hawaii that have both statewide bans. Also, many other large cities, San Francisco, LA, Seattle, Chicago, have plastic bag bans. Let me just quickly go over some of the reasons that we think this bylaw, that we would ask for your support for this proposed bylaw. The type of harm that plastic bags cause include, number one, killing a very large number of animals, particularly marine life. That's because the plastic bags are entanglement hazard for animals, and of course they look like food and animals eat them and die in large numbers. Plastic bags pollute waterways and oceans. They require petroleum, which is a non-renewable resource for production. They contribute to increased greenhouse gases and climate change, an issue which is of great importance in Arlington. Plastic bags, as we know, are not biodegradable in landfills or the environment. They will last about 1,000 years. They contribute greatly to litter in Arlington and elsewhere. When they are burned, as Arlington's trash does go to an incinerator, they can release toxic air emissions. They have very low recycling rates. Typically, that's less than 10%, and nationally, it's considered even less than around 6%. So despite any efforts to promote education, recycling rates for plastic bags will never be significant. When they are put in curbside recycling, which they should not be, they tend to jam up the sorting machinery and cause a great deal of increased costs. There are many other reasons which we'd like to get into why we want to support this ban, but for the sake of shortness in time, I'll just show you that if you look around town, you will see these kind of bags all over town, in the trees, in the waterways, on the streets, and this will also greatly help to reduce plastic bag litter. So with that, I'd like to cede the rest of my time to Greg Dennis to continue this.
Thank you. Greg Dennis, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. So how will this ban affect consumers? Well, the first thing you need to understand is that there will still be paper bags available. There will still be reusable bags available at checkout. And we have, as you heard, a number of exceptions for plastic bags, including produce bags, newspaper bags left on the porch or driveway, et cetera. So there'll still be plenty of bags available for your pet waste. And we do not anticipate increasing consumer cost, and that is because, the first thing you have to understand about plastic bags is they are not free today. They cost about 2 to 5 cents per bag, thousands of dollars per month are paid by supermarkets for these bags, and that is passed on to you, the consumer. Now, while it's true that paper bags cost more per bag, what we've seen in other communities that have enacted plastic bag bans is a total reduction in the number of single-use bags used as people transition to reusable bags, and that's been pretty dramatic, upwards of, I think, 60% increases in reusable bag use and not comparable increases in paper bag use. We also have a long implementation period, a pretty generous time period for small businesses to comply with this bylaw. We've also learned from talking to a number of retailers around town and investigating what's done in other communities, a number of best practices for retailers to follow. That could include, for example, offering an incentive, the way Whole Foods or Trader Joe's does for bringing your own bag. One of the common questions we get is paper really better than plastic? The answer to that is yes. Again, the major goal of this article is to have create a transition to reusable bags, but when it comes down to it, we do believe paper is better than plastic. It is biodegradable. It can be recycled. It does not clog our waterways. It does not strangle and choke wildlife. Why don't we just promote increased recycling? This has been tried, and it has failed. California in 2009 made an attempt. I believe they're the only state that measures actual single-use plastic bag recycling rates. It was at 3% in California in 2009. They made a big push, passed some new laws to promote increased recycling, and increased the recycling rate all the way up to 4%. To summarize some of the benefits, why would this be good for Arlington? We will reduce litter cleanup costs, reduce storm drain cleanup, et cetera, listed on the slide, reduce toxic emissions, and really position Arlington as an environmental leader and join these other communities across the state that are doing this. We have a large number of co-sponsors, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Health, Sustainable Arlington, the Recycling Committee, League of Women Voters, Mothers Out Front, et cetera. Again, there are a number of questions you may have that I did not answer up here, that Jim did not answer, but if you take a look at that FAQ, they should all be answered there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now it's past 11. We'll take that motion to adjourn. We'll pick up exactly where we left off. Mr. O'Connor's making a motion to adjourn. A second? All in favor? Okay. Opposed? No. Are there any motions for reconsideration? Any notices of reconsideration? Mr. Logan.
William Logan, Precinct 2. I asked for reconsideration.
I can't hear you.
I asked for a reconsideration on Article 14, having voted on the prevailing side.
Okay, Mr. Logan is reconsideration on Article 14, having voted on the prevailing side.
Thank you.
Any other notices of reconsideration? Seeing none, we'll see you Wednesday. Thank you very much.